This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Mayor A.C. Wharton on the State of the City. Tonight, I'm Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We are joined tonight by Mayor A.C. Wharton. Thank you for being here.
It's great to be here.
Also, Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News, and Brian Collins, finance director for the City of Memphis.
Thanks for having me.
We'll start with a big issue. It's not necessarily the sexiest issue, but it's the unfunded liabilities, and it's a big budget gap of some size, which we'll talk about, that the city's faced with. And then we'll move into a whole range of other issues that are going on right now. But let's start with this question of what is the unfunded liability? What is this budget gap? The unions have talked about a number in the 300 range. I think the administration has talked about a number in the 700 million range. What is that number, and how is it paid for?
It's a big number, and we don't have the money, whether it's 300 or whether it's 700.
Yeah.
So the issue is, I mean, it's good for discussion purposes now, but the bottom line is whether it's 300 or whether it's 700, we've got to make some changes to come up with the money. We think our numbers are good. We'll soon find out. Pretty soon we're going to have all the actuaries in just before the next council meeting. But the key is whether it's 300, 400, whatever, where do we get the money? That's the challenge there.
And isn't it, it's fundamentally, I mean, really basic level here. You raise taxes, or you cut spending, or?
That is correct, or the state does it for us.
Which doesn't seem likely.
Which, when I say for us, I mean, they come up with an answer.
They come up
They're
with
not
an
going to
answer.
bail us out. They
Yeah.
will come up with an answer under present legislation, and present laws rather, or legislation pending.
Right.
But those are the choices.
It is, I think, Mark Norris, who's leading in the state Senate a bill that would force municipalities, not just Memphis, because by no means, we always have to say, I mean, people think this is just a Memphis problem. It's not. It's a national problem on many levels. But the state wants areas to take care of this number. Are you in favor of that legislation? Would you like it modified? I mean, what's your feeling on that legislation?
I'm fine with the legislation. We sat down and talked with the treasurer and the comptroller. They built into the law, the bill at that time, some provisions that'll give us some flexibility along the way. But the bottom line is, come 6 years, we're going to be in compliance.
Right.
What I wanted to do is that along the way, for example, we have that $57 million school thing out there. What if a judge were to come down next year and say, pay it, or pay a big piece of it? Then that year I would have to say, Mr. Comptroller, I got to take care of the school thing right now. We're got an installment plan. Don't put the death penalty on me.
Right.
So we got that built in, but in the end, we ended up at the same place. You got to be in compliance in 6 years.
Brian Collins, I'll bring you in. Your finance background, you've been finance director for a year?
A little over a year.
A little over a year now. Yeah. Why is there such a big, from a purely mathematical point of view, why and how can there be such differences of opinion on what the number is?
Well, I think the biggest issues that remain right now are two. One is how much will salaries of employees grow over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And I think what we've seen in the last 10 or 20 years, inflation has been really low, and the expectations that people have built up is relatively modest increases. But actuaries, and I think that's the position that some of the unions are taking, is that, hey, recently growth has been pretty low, but you have to look at much longer spans of time, 30 and 50 years, where inflation is much higher. If we'd been having this conversation, for instance, back in the 70s, our actuaries are saying that it's 5%. Yeah. Well, back in the 70s, I think people would have said, whoa, that's way too modest. So I think the difference of opinion is somewhat influenced by the current economic environment, and the actuaries at PwC are taking a much longer view, and they expect growth to be higher. So I think that is the primary driver of the difference of viewpoint between the unions and the PwC actuaries.
One more
right
question,
now.
and then I'll get Bill in here. But you know, I mean, I was thinking about this before we started the show. I mean, on some very simplistic level, if the unions are saying it's 300 million and it's going to go to the union workers, why not throw your actuary away and say, well, 300 is a lot easier to get to than the 700 that the PwC came. I mean, why not take the lower number?
Well, because look, you have to look at it in the long term. It would be, yes, for us, it would be easy to do that politically, be the best thing in the world. I'm not going to do that because 10 years, 15 years, somebody else will be sitting around this very table here answering the same question. Right. That's what got us to where we are now, taking that short-term view, kicking the can year to year. Okay. I'm not going to do that.
Okay, Bill.
Council Chairman Jim Strickland on the show last week talked about perhaps doing a 2-year ramp-up as opposed to a 5-year ramp-up. What do you think about that?
Look, the quicker the better. And that's easy to say right there. Mm-hmm. But the question then becomes, how do you do that? The question at the outset, every person wants, well, how is it? You're going to cut expenses, cut the payout, or are you going to raise taxes? The more you compress it, which is fine, let's get this over with, but it simply means that you're going to have to find more money or more cuts in a more condensed, compacted period of time. That's all it means. I've talked with him briefly, the chairman. I've talked with Councilman Strickland briefly on that. We're going to be meeting. If we can find a way to do this in 2 years that's anywhere near reasonable, hey, I'll get on board. We need to get this behind us once and for all.
Right, and instead of about $15 million over 5 years, you would be talking about a $40 million shift from somewhere else over 2 years with this.
That's correct. And let me, before you even get to asking the question, you're talking about cuts. The big issue then is, are you willing, or would we be willing to take a look at a tax increase to make up the difference? I've said all along that I would not. Of course, I was looking at a 5-year spread, and then we did not have the legislation pending up there that said you have to do that. I think we have to remain open-minded and be very careful when it comes to the public safety piece, because that's where the money is, quite frankly. Matter of fact, we're trying to squeeze right now out of police and fire a total of about $15 million. We're working every day on that, including weekends, to try to come up with that. When it gets to the point where public safety may be at risk, then you got to shift to the revenue side.
Mm-hmm. There seem to be two pieces to this. The annual contribution and then the bigger number going forward. Am I off on that, or is that an accurate description of what we're dealing with?
Well, yeah, but there are really two sides of the same coin. One is the total unfunded liability, which is the very big number, and then the smaller but still substantial number is the annual payment that you make toward that. And right now the dispute again is somewhere between $300 and $700 million on the big number, but the number that means the most to us in the short run, which is the one that we have to fit into our budget, is that annual required contribution, and that's going to grow very substantially. Right now we're paying $20 million, and over the next couple of years we have to get that number up by $50 or more million. Mm-hmm.
But keep in mind, the unfunded liability, whatever it is, that dark cloud that's presently hanging over us, that's going to stay there for a while because it's based on the old plan that we now have, the legacy plan. No matter what we do, it's going to be there for the foreseeable future. But now down the road, if we close that plan, the present plan, that number is going to start to shrink. Our annual required contribution will begin to shrink simply because we're not feeding this monster, this $700 million monster that's hanging over us.
And is that the whole question of changing the pension plan for future retirees, going to what a defined contribution versus defined benefit? So right now, old retirees they're going to get a certain amount of money that's in the contract, that's in the pension plan. Going forward, and many private businesses have gone to this, we'll put a certain amount of money in there. It'll appreciate as it does, and that's what you'll have to work with.
Right, and see, to use a weather term, once the actuaries see that you're not putting any more folks into that monster that you have there, that's when you see some relief in sight, because they know one thing: it can't grow anymore. Why? Nobody's going into it unless you go back and enrich the benefits, which is not going to happen. So that's why we benefit by that in the short term, because actuaries look at that and say, the city's getting its house in order. That monster's not going to grow anymore.
Right. So you would start in a new plan. I believe the last read I had on this was with new hires and with those who are unvested, who have been with the city for less than 10 years.
That is correct. That's why they call it a hybrid. You have the old existing plan stays. If you're vested under Tennessee law, case they call it Blackwell, we can't touch that. So it's not that anybody's being timid. It's just as the law now stands, we cannot touch that. But for those who have not hit the 10-year mark, those who've not yet been hired, they go into a new plan, 401k type plan. We increase our present contribution, which is 6%. We increase it to 8% for those individuals.
Let me move. We're about 10 minutes in here and begin to shift to off the pension question. I mean, it's a huge number. I mean, we kind of joked last week about it. It's not the sexiest or most compelling issue, but it is compelling in terms of the dollar amounts to it. But you talked about fire and safety, and I think the numbers, and Brian Collins, you can correct me. What is it? 80% of all city employees are fire and police, and salary, benefit, all that is the biggest number, I assume, in the budget. There's been talk about trying to shift, some police work, let's say, where you've got uniformed officers doing more clerical work, and can we get civilian people doing that and uniformed officers out on the street fighting crime? What kind of shifts are possible within the police department and police spending in this going forward?
Well, there are a number of backroom services, if you wish, that could be civilianized, as the term is. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things. Do you need uniformed officers to sit behind the consoles at the real-time crime center? Those things. Other things that have been placed on the table, and I say placed on the table because they're not yet proposals. Do we wish to continue investigating every non-injury auto accident, fender bender? Now, right. We full service. Many police departments do not do that. Those are the kinds of things. And you look at those things because one thing you do not want to do is to take boots off the ground when it comes to those things that bring the most fear. We want the uniformed officers, the boots on the ground. Now, is there anything behind the street car, the cars on the street, that you could change, yet keep the police presence out there? Do we wish to go back to PSTs? If you do decide to investigate all accidents, do we need fully loaded uniformed commissioned officers out there doing that? Those are the things we have to look at. Keeping in mind that you never want to get to the point where when you call and there's a threat or whatever, they got to be there.
Okay. All right. Bill.
Do the police and fire departments, do you feel like they are where they need to be now in terms of personnel? Because the issue with those two unions in particular has been recruit classes. We have more people retiring or about to retire and leave than we have coming in. So the thinking is that the complement might be at some risk of falling below an acceptable level.
Let me take the fire department first because, and I have to credit them, Director Benson has done a good job. Over the past 3 years, he has cut completely 114 positions. So I'm really looking more closely at that. Police department is another situation. I am not yet convinced that we're at the point where we simply cannot cut anymore or become more efficient. Let's put it that way. We're looking at that right now, Bill. And we're bringing in outside consultants. We're bringing Dr. Janikowski back in, who knows as much about this police department as anybody else, works well with the Director Armstrong. Director Armstrong, to his credit, is giving me, he's starting at $1 million. Take this $1 million off, I'll stop doing this. Take $2 million off, we won't do this. Take $3 million off, and we're going all the way up. Now, at some point in there, you're going to get down to the bone marrow. You're going to get somewhere in there. Where that is, I do not know, but we're going through that exercise right now.
Right, and there's got to be people listening who say, what are we talking about, cutting police at a time when there have been a series of shootings, some tragic shootings lately. I know that I think Tony Armstrong would say, and other people would say, well, overall violent crime is down. We have to remember that, but every shooting is one shooting too many, kind of thing. So, your take on that? You don't want to put people don't want to feel crime is a reality, and it's also a perception, and they can't perceive that we're pulling back on crime fighting efforts, I suppose.
And that's why it's going to be a very difficult sell. Let me tell you, It's one thing to sit with folks in the business community who analyze things, and then, as Brian will tell you, we've been to 3 town hall meetings in the last 2 weeks, Whitehaven, Westwood, and Orange Mound, and the citizens are saying, we don't want anything cut from the police department. There's going to be a very difficult sale. You're absolutely right. You know, it used to be when I'd go to town hall meetings, folks would get up and say, we're tired of these police roughing us up, and they're abusing us, and they're mean and they're disrespectful. We've not heard one of those complaints. It's just the opposite. You're absolutely right. We're going to have to do a better job of educating. And keep in mind, this is not about taking police officers away from protecting people. I mean, that's first and foremost. But are there things that are not on the first line of protection out there that we could revamp, that we could shift to other agencies or do a different way? That's what we're talking about.
Critics, I mean, as we talk about spending, we talk about the pension side, we talk about the crime side, you get critics who say, okay, that's all well and good, but why is the city doing things like investing in a baseball park downtown, or funding Crosstown, or Overton Square, these projects, Whitehaven? There's talk now of converting, what is it, the Southbrook Mall and the Raleigh Springs Mall. Those are multiple millions of dollars, and you've got people saying, well, why are they doing that? Why don't we put more boots on the ground? Why do we spend money in those kind of fanciful projects? And I'm not saying I believe it, but that's you hear it. I know you do. So let's start. We'll start with you, but then we'll talk a little bit about the finance side of that too. Why are those things worthwhile in a time of constricted budgets?
You hear the term economic engine. You have to fuel. You have to put the coal in the furnace that's running your economy. In other cities, it would be manufacturing. In Las Vegas, it would be casinos. But we are a tourism-based, service-based economy here. Tourism brings millions of dollars in here. We got to keep that engine going. The stadium is a part of that. Graceland is a part of that. Whitehaven is a part of that. The TDZ on the fairground. Those are the things that bring the dollars in here. Now, if we could shift our base, economic base, economy base, to more manufacturing, which we're trying to do, but we're not there yet, then we wouldn't have to keep building all of these amenities that bring, we wouldn't need Bass Pro, because we'd have a General Motors plant and a Ford Motor plant, but we don't have those. So we have to dance with the boy who brung us to the dance, and it's tourism. Graceland, you've seen the studies, Beale Street, Graceland, Civil Rights Museum, 3 most iconic places. Now, I didn't say that, National Geographic said that. That's what's bringing the money in here. That's how we're going to make up this pension cost. That's how we'll fund schools and all of those things. We have to feed the engine that's employing the people here. That's what it boils down to.
What is the budget? There's the operating budget, and then there's the capital budget. Is that correct? And a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about these projects are in the capital budget. Correct. I mean, are you comfortable, again, from a finance point of view? I mean, that these projects are one, they're appropriate to be financed, but that there's accountability. It's another thing people say is, well, is anyone really checking to see that these projects are paying off? Or are we just writing a blank check and there's developers running off and doing whatever they want?
No, the biggest projects that we just mentioned here, Bass Pro, for instance, is really the largest one, and then you've got the AutoZone Park. Both of those are going to be self-sustaining. So not only are they going to help tremendously attract more tourism dollars to the city, they're also going to pay for themselves out of the increased sales tax that we're going to generate. And no, we just haven't let the developers run hither and yon. We have been watching very, very closely. The Wall Street watches this very closely. All of the plans, all of the projections get scrutinized, not just by the developers, but by us and by Wall Street, who are the folks that expect to be repaid on those bonds. So that goes through a process that doesn't take away from the money that we spend on the operating side. There's this misperception that every time we spend $1 million on a capital project, somehow that's taking away from operating dollars. In fact, the opposite is true. It doesn't take away, number one, and number two, it really helps build the base. It generates a better economic environment, brings more jobs to the city.
Is there a point at which, one more question on this, of what, in the financial crisis, people talked about moral hazard, the federal government bailing out big banks and bailing out big, AIG. And is there a point at which, some of these really very privately oriented developments, I've heard many people pick on the Hotel Chiska development. I mean, I work downtown. I love seeing that place is getting redeveloped. But shouldn't that have just been a private project? Why did the city have to get involved? And every project that you get involved in, does that bring one more person to the trough saying, hey, well, I'll get a little of that money too? I mean, I hear that criticism a lot, that it creates this expectation in what should be purely private projects.
Look, if you were to look at the things we turned down, you would see that we don't just grab everything that comes down the road. And sometimes, particularly take the Chiska, for example, when you have a piece of property that's fallen into such a blighted condition, it's damaging properties in terms of the value all around it, right across the street from the Orpheum there. Right. So it is proper for government to step in and to be a part of the process so that the private investment is willing to come in. But we're not going to go in 100% on our own and start doing that. So it's a mix, and we try to strike that balance on each of the projects.
Bill.
Mayor, you were in New Orleans at the end of the week with the president and talking about, we talked earlier about probably a different level of the city's approach to fighting crime. The discussion yesterday came as there was another shooting here, and talk a little bit about the president's initiative and where the city is on that, and kind of the impact of not so much the crime statistics, but the anecdotal evidence that we deal with in terms of violence, which you have said is more than a crime problem, is actually a public health issue.
It is definitely a public health issue. The president, and uncharacteristically so, has said, look, let's quit being so academic about this. We know where the challenge is. It's with young men of color. In Memphis, for the most part, that happens to be young black men. We've got to just face up to it, and quit being academic. Oh, young children are in jeopardy. Let's be very precise. Young male blacks in the city of Memphis are in grave jeopardy in the United States as a whole. For the first time in his presidency, the president looked right in the camera, told a nation, we have something that we have to come to grips with. We cannot do it simply by saying they're marauding out there, let's just round them up, make everybody mad, and see the value side of it. When you get inside their heads and minds, as the president did, which moved him to come up with the program yesterday he's in Chicago, when he ran into this group of kids who just spoke out to him. He got to see what was inside them. He said, let's take this national. We've got to do that here. We can't build any more juvenile court detention halls, any more jails. We've got to get in and use programs, as we're already doing with the Bloomberg money, to take these young men where they are and take them to where they ought to be. The face of crime in Memphis, the nation sees this. We just made the national news with and this is anecdotal, but it's two lives have been ruined. The 13-year-old is dead, a physical death. The 15-year-old's life will never be the same. More and more and more, that's becoming the face of crime. And this is why we're going to just come up with precise programs to focus on the positive, try to flip the script on this.
Do you think that our criminal justice system here in Shelby County, as it currently stands, meets that challenge that the president outlined? Are we doing the right things in our criminal justice system's approach, or are we doing what we've just been doing for a long time?
It's spotty. Let me answer your question. Does it meet the standards now? No, it does not. Because we are heavy on the prosecution, heavy on the incarceration, heavy on the punishment side. Now, this is not to say that you just give up on suppression. You got to hold people accountable. But if we spent just 1/2 as much on getting to these kids, and they're kids, I'm not using that in a derisive manner. They're kids, they're children. That's what a 13-year-old. Get them, and it's very costly though. If I didn't have the Bloomberg money, I wouldn't be able to do the literacy program. I wouldn't be able to do the summer night lights programs to keep them engaged at night in basketball and things like that. But no, we are not there. We've got to get there. It's going to eat us alive if we do not.
How do you think we get there? You know the system from being the public defender. Where do we start to turn it around?
That's what the president's my brother's keeper is. we have to stop saying, oh, I don't do a black boy crime. That's not my thing. I'm in healthcare. I don't do a black boy crime. I'm a minister, or I'm a business person. Look, if you're in this town, you're being impacted by what young male blacks are doing. Your stores are closing. People are not investing. Folks are moving out. The fear factor is there, let's face it. And everybody's impacted by it, so they are your little brother. That's what it's all about, Bill. The system, me, 201 Poplar, will never do it alone. Mm-hmm. But if we, as the president has done, get the philanthropic community, I was just reading this morning, the Kellogg Foundation is investing $750,000 just to try to design a program, and then they will come up with grants for programs that work. So to answer your question, my brother's keeper means this is everybody's problem. It is not a criminal justice system problem.
With just a minute left, I mean, do you find at this point, I mean, it's 2014, not 1968, that talk about race, that it's a more comfortable conversation for people, that you can talk about young black men and the problem there without vilifying a whole race of people?
That's correct. We have to be just honest, and I said this down in New Orleans yesterday. I don't feel guilty when I go into a community and say, let's come up with this program, and if the room is 100% black, there's nothing negative from that. Let's just come to grips with it and quit tiptoeing around it.
We will leave it there. Thank you very much for being here. Brian Collins, thank you for being here. Bill Drees, thanks. And thank you for joining us. Good night.